Tombstone, Arizona Territory, October 26, 1881. The streets were quiet, too quiet, the kind of silence that presses in around you like a warning. At 2:55 in the afternoon, 4 men began walking down Fremont Street. Wyatt Earp, his brothers, Virgil and Morgan, and a sickly-looking man coughing into a handkerchief. John Henry Holliday, better known as Doc. They walked with purpose, not toward cover, not toward safety. They were walking into a fight. A real one, not the kind made for dime novels or stage plays. No grandstands, no warnings, just a dusty alley behind a photography studio, and 5 armed cowboys waiting at the end of it. Within 30 seconds, more than 30 shots would be fired. 3 men would fall dead. 2 others would bleed in the dirt. And the town of Tombstone, that tiny boom town in the Arizona Territory, would be etched into legend. But what happened in that alley wasn't some righteous stand between lawmen and outlaws. It was a boiling feud, built on grudges, politics, ambition, and blood. This is the true story of the gunfight at the OK Corral, and like all legends, it didn't begin in a blaze of glory. It began with a simmering hate. Tombstone in the early 1880s was no sleepy desert town. It was booming. Silver had been discovered nearby just 4 years earlier, and by 1881, the town had swelled to over 7,000 residents. With more than 100 saloons, dozens of gambling halls, and a growing undercurrent of crime and corruption, the Earps came to Tombstone for opportunity, not law. Wyatt, Virgil, and Morgan Earp were all former lawmen, but they weren't exactly clean-cut heroes. They were known gamblers, occasionally on the take, and more interested in business than justice. Wyatt had left Dodge City behind. Doc Holliday, a tubercular gambler and sometime dentist, followed him west. Together, they came looking to make money, not clean up the streets. But Tombstone already had its own power structure, and the Earp brothers were outsiders. The real power in southern Arizona didn't wear a badge. It rode a horse and wore a red sash. The cowboys, as they were known, weren't cattlemen in the John Wayne sense. They were rustlers, horse thieves, stagecoach robbers, and in Tombstone they were protected by politics, money, and fear. Their leaders, Ike Clanton, Tom and Frank McLaury and Billy Clanton, operated under the table but walked the streets openly. Everyone knew who they were, and most people stayed out of their way, but not the Earps, and certainly not Doc Holliday. Tensions escalated fast. Virgil Earp was appointed city marshal, a role that brought him face to face with the cowboys regularly. Doc, ever volatile, had once killed a man in a saloon for insulting him. He was loyal to Wyatt, but also unpredictable, prone to drink, violence, and bad decisions. By the fall of 1881, the cowboys and the Earps were circling each other like vultures. In early October, a stagecoach robbery left 2 men dead. Wyatt suspected Ike Clanton and his gang. Ike, in turn, accused the Earps of framing him. Insults were traded, threats made. Doc Holliday, fueled by whiskey and resentment, was especially vocal. Then came the final spark. The night of October 25th, Ike Clanton got drunk. Very drunk. He wandered from saloon to saloon, threatening the Earps, shouting about Doc Holliday, swearing that he'd kill them all. By morning, word was out. Ike was armed, angry, and looking for blood. The Earps confronted him. Virgil pistol-whipped him and disarmed him. Ike was hauled into court and fined for carrying a weapon in town. But by the time he was released, his brother Billy and the McLaurys had arrived. And they were armed. They said they weren't looking for trouble. They said they were leaving town. But they didn't. Instead, they lingered behind the OK Corral, loitering in a vacant lot next to Fly's photography studio. Armed and waiting, and that's where the Earps found them. At 2:55 p.m., the Earps and Doc Holliday turned onto Fremont Street. Virgil, as marshal, had the legal authority to disarm men carrying weapons inside town limits. But no one was under any illusion. This was a showdown. As the four men approached, witnesses described a quiet tension, the kind that settles in your bones before violence. Doc carried a shotgun. The rest had revolvers. They stopped just feet away from the cowboys. What happened next is still debated over a century later. Some said the Earps fired first. Others swore it was Billy Clanton. Some said Tom McLaury had no gun. Others claimed he was reaching for it. What is known is that 30 shots were fired in less than 30 seconds. Frank McLaury was shot in the stomach, staggered into the street, and returned fire before collapsing. Billy Clanton was hit in the chest, but kept shooting until his dying breath. Tom McLaury was reportedly unarmed, but he was shot in the side and died instantly. Ike Clanton fled the moment the bullets started flying. He survived without a scratch. Virgil and Morgan Earp were both wounded. Doc Holliday took a graze to the hip. Wyatt Earp, miraculously, was untouched. When the smoke cleared, 3 men lay dead in the dirt. 2 lawmen stood bleeding, and Tombstone was never the same again. The gunfight, often misrepresented as taking place inside the OK Corral, actually happened a few lots down, in a narrow passage behind a boarding house and photography studio. But no one remembers the address, they just remember the legend. The aftermath was far from heroic. The Earps were arrested and charged with murder. A month-long hearing followed, with testimony from dozens of witnesses. In the end, the judge ruled that Virgil had acted within the law, that the Earps had done their duty under extraordinary pressure, but the damage was done. The cowboys saw it as an execution, and they wanted revenge. On December 28th, someone ambushed Virgil Earp in the street, crippling his left arm permanently. 3 months later, Morgan Earp was shot in the back while playing billiards. He died within minutes. Wyatt had seen enough. What followed was a vendetta ride. A personal war led by Wyatt Earp and Doc Holliday to hunt down those they blamed for Morgan's murder. They killed Frank Stillwell near a train station. They gunned down others in the desert. Some of the killings were legal, others, not so much. Eventually, Wyatt and Doc left Arizona. The legend followed them. Doc Holliday died of tuberculosis in 1887 in a sanitarium in Colorado. His last words were said to be a dry joke. This is funny. Wyatt Earp lived until 1929, long enough to see himself turned into a myth. He gave interviews, shaped the narrative, and made sure the story favored him. Movies, books, and folk tales did the rest. But in truth, the gunfight at the OK Corral was a short, violent eruption of a long, simmering feud. It wasn't about law and order. It was about pride, reputation, power, and blood. Tombstone still stands. So does the alley where the shots rang out. Tourists come every year, dressed in cowboy hats, reenacting the shootout with blanks and smiles. But if you stand there quietly, in the real dirt, not the stage show, you can almost hear it. Not the gunshots, the silence that came right before them. Thank you for listening to Deserted Trails. Subscribe for more forgotten stories from the old frontier.